History is filled with names that vanished into footnotes, but some stories refuse to stay buried. In the late 19th century, when science claimed it could explain everything and superstition still ruled the night, one girl became an unsolved contradiction. Her existence unsettled doctors, frightened towns, and left records that end without answers. This is not just a forgotten name from the past, it is a mystery that still breathes in the shadows of history. In 1893, a year anchored between rigid Victorian order and the creeping fear of the unknown, the name Bella Adams surfaced quietly within fragmented records that were never meant to preserve legends. She did not arrive with ceremony or announcement, but through scattered mentions in medical logs, parish notes, and local observations that hinted at something deeply irregular. Bella was described as a young girl with ordinary features at first glance, yet those who encountered her struggled to record her presence in ordinary language. Her brown eyes were consistently noted, not for their color, but for the way they seemed to disrupt attention, holding observers in a prolonged stillness that made time feel uncertain. Physicians documented her physical health as stable, her pulse normal, her breathing calm, yet many added personal remarks in margins, confessing an unexplained discomfort they could not ethically attribute to illness. In an era obsessed with categorization, Bella resisted classification, existing in a space that neither science nor superstition could comfortably claim. What made her extraordinary was not a single dramatic event, but a pattern of anomalies that accumulated slowly and relentlessly. People reported sensations of pressure in the air when she entered enclosed spaces, as if the atmosphere itself reacted to her presence. Lamps were said to dim inexplicably, and rooms grew unnaturally quiet, not silent in sound, but muted in spirit, as though conversations lost their weight. These details appeared repeatedly across unrelated sources, written by individuals who never met each other, bound only by the same unsettled reaction. Teachers noted that students grew distracted around her, losing track of lessons and later struggling to recall what had been taught. Caretakers observed that Bella slept without visible dreams, lying motionless for hours, her eyes opening suddenly as if she had never truly rested. No fever accompanied her wakefulness, no delirium explained it, leaving professionals unsettled by the absence of symptoms where symptoms were expected. Religious figures were drawn into her story when families began requesting spiritual assessments, fearing possession or divine marking. Yet even among clergy, consensus fractured. Some felt an overwhelming calm in her presence, a stillness they interpreted as sacred, while others experienced an intense unease that compelled them to shorten prayers and leave rooms abruptly. Records describe sermons altered after encounters with her, passages changed without explanation, as if the speaker's thoughts had been quietly redirected. Bella herself offered no insight, answering questions politely but vaguely, her words clear yet strangely empty, leaving listeners with the sense that meaning had slipped away between sentences. This disconnect only deepened the mystery, as she never claimed to feel different, never described visions or voices, and never expressed fear or pride in the reaction she caused. Medical curiosity soon bordered on obsession, with examinations repeated not because new evidence emerged, but because professionals believed they had missed something crucial. Instruments behaved unpredictably during assessments, thermometers recording inconsistent temperatures, watches stopping during timed observations, all dismissed officially as equipment failure, yet privately recorded with careful handwriting. These unexplained disruptions fed rumors beyond institutional walls, transforming Bella into a figure whispered about in markets and households. Stories exaggerated her influence, claiming she caused animals to refuse food, infants to cry without cause, and elderly individuals to recall memories long forgotten, though no single account could be verified in full. What remained consistent was the emotional aftermath people experienced after seeing her, a lingering sense of dislocation, as if reality had briefly shifted and failed to settle back into place. Despite the growing unease, Bella was never accused of wrongdoing, nor was she treated with overt hostility. Instead, she existed under a veil of cautious distance, observed but rarely embraced, documented but never understood. Authorities hesitated to confine her, lacking legal grounds, while families hesitated to keep her, fearing consequences they could not name. Her life unfolded in fragments, moving from one caretaker to another, each departure marked by vague explanations and unfinished sentences in records that abruptly ended. By the late 1890s, references to Bella Adams diminished, not because answers had been found, but because the questions surrounding her became too uncomfortable to pursue, leaving behind a trail of unresolved observations that continue to suggest she was not merely misunderstood, but fundamentally incompatible with the explanations of her time. As Bella Adams became more widely discussed beyond the narrow circles of caretakers and physicians, the reactions she provoked began to divide sharply along lines of belief, authority, and fear. Doctors approached her as a challenge to their growing confidence in medical science, convinced that any unexplained phenomenon must eventually yield to observation and logic. They examined her repeatedly, sometimes with professional restraint, sometimes with visible frustration, documenting every measurable aspect of her body while privately admitting that something essential remained beyond reach. Their reports often contradicted one another, not in facts, but in interpretation. One physician described her as perfectly healthy yet emotionally vacant. Another insisted she possessed an unusual cognitive depth, masked by deliberate silence. A third concluded that her condition did not exist at all, suggesting that the disturbances reported by others were products of suggestion and collective anxiety rather than anything intrinsic to the girl herself. Religious authorities responded with equal intensity, but even less agreement. Some clergy viewed Bella as a test of faith, believing her presence exposed the fragility of human certainty rather than any supernatural threat. They spoke gently to her, offered prayers, and recorded sensations of peace that followed their encounters, describing a calm that lingered long after she left the room. Others felt the opposite, reporting sudden dread, intrusive thoughts, and an overwhelming urge to end their visits prematurely. Parish notes hinted at debates held behind closed doors, where priests argued whether Bella represented divine mystery, moral symbolism, or something dangerously unnatural that Scripture could not clearly define. The absence of clear religious doctrine only intensified suspicion, as ambiguity was often more frightening than outright condemnation. The public response was the most volatile of all, shaped not by careful study but by rumor and imagination. Townspeople whispered about Bella in fragments, stories growing darker with each retelling. Some claimed she caused sickness simply by standing too close, while others insisted she cured ailments without touching those afflicted. Children were warned not to stare into her eyes for too long, though no one could explain why. Markets fell silent when she passed through, conversations trailing off as people avoided acknowledging her presence. Yet there were also those who sought her out deliberately, driven by curiosity or desperation, hoping her unexplained nature might offer answers to their own unexplainable suffering. Authorities struggled to manage the growing tension surrounding her. There were discussions of institutional care, but no legal justification could be found, as Bella committed no crime and exhibited no diagnosable illness. To detain her would require admitting fear as policy, something officials were unwilling to record. Instead, they relied on quiet relocation, moving her from one jurisdiction to another, hoping distance might dissolve the mystery. Each transfer generated new reports, new reactions, and new contradictions, reinforcing the sense that Bella was not shaped by her environment, but that environments reshaped themselves uneasily around her. What made these conflicting responses especially unsettling was Bella's apparent indifference to them. She did not react to suspicion, reverence, or fear in any observable way. When doctors debated her condition within earshot, she listened without comment. When clergy prayed over her, she neither resisted nor responded with gratitude. When crowds avoided her gaze, she continued walking calmly, as though unaware of the tension she carried. This emotional neutrality unsettled everyone, as it denied them a narrative in which she was victim, villain, or miracle. Without a role to assign her, people projected their own anxieties onto her silence. Over time, the contradictions themselves became part of her legend. Accounts from respected professionals clashed openly, eroding public trust in authority. If doctors could not agree, and priests could not discern, then the foundations of certainty felt weaker than ever. Bella became less a person and more a mirror, reflecting the fears of an era caught between enlightenment and superstition. Scientific journals dismissed her as anecdotal, religious texts avoided her entirely, and popular stories transformed her into something neither side recognized. The truth, whatever it was, existed only in the uneasy space between these interpretations. As debates intensified, fatigue set in. Constant disagreement without resolution drained the urgency from official discourse, even as unease lingered beneath the surface. Records grew shorter, comments vaguer, as if acknowledging her directly risked reigniting conflict. Bella Adams remained present, but increasingly unspoken, her existence tolerated rather than confronted. The silence that followed was not peace, but avoidance, a collective decision to step away from a mystery that threatened to expose how little anyone truly understood. What unsettled those who crossed paths with Bella Adams was never a single dramatic display, but a series of quiet disturbances that slipped beneath the threshold of disbelief. There were no declarations of magic, no visible signs of possession, no spectacles that could be dismissed as performance. Instead, the unease gathered in small details that felt too consistent to ignore. People noted how conversations slowed around her, how pauses stretched longer than intended, how words seemed to lose their urgency once spoken in her presence. It was as if the natural rhythm of human interaction faltered slightly, just enough to be felt, but never enough to be proven. Those who prided themselves on rational thought found this especially troubling, because nothing overtly violated the laws they trusted, yet everything felt subtly misaligned. Animals responded first, or at least more honestly. Horses refused to move when she approached, their muscles tensing as though sensing a threat no human could see. Dogs either cowered behind their owners or followed her with unnatural devotion, whining softly without aggression or joy. Farmers recorded livestock behaving erratically on days she passed nearby, milk spoiling faster, hens abandoning nests, though no disease could be identified. These incidents were explained away individually, blamed on weather or coincidence. But together they formed a pattern that lingered in memory long after official explanations were offered. Nature itself seemed unsure how to behave around her, responding not with violence, but with confusion. Time became another quiet accomplice to the mystery. People frequently misjudged how long they had spent near Bella, insisting minutes had passed when clocks revealed hours, or believing entire afternoons were gone when scarcely any time had elapsed. Watches stopped during meetings with her, only to resume later without repair, and though such malfunctions were common in the era, their timing raised unspoken doubts. Teachers complained that lessons dissolved into haze when Bella sat among students, entire sections of the day later unrecalled by both instructor and class. These lapses were never dramatic enough to provoke alarm, but persistent enough to unsettle those who depended on structure and routine. Memory itself appeared unreliable in her wake. Individuals recalled speaking with her in detail, yet struggled to remember what had actually been said. They could describe the setting, the sound of her voice, the direction of her gaze, but not the substance of the exchange. This absence of content created a peculiar distress, as though something important had been removed deliberately, leaving behind only the outline of an experience. Some described a faint pressure behind the eyes afterward. Others a lingering sadness without cause, emotions detached from identifiable events. Attempts to write down these interactions often stalled, sentences abandoned halfway through, as if language itself resisted capturing whatever had occurred. Bella's own behavior offered no clarification. She did not react to these disturbances, nor did she seem aware of them. Her movements were calm, unhurried, and precise, lacking the nervous energy one might expect from someone at the center of growing speculation. She complied with requests, answered questions, and followed routines without resistance, yet never appeared fully engaged. Observers struggled to describe her emotional state, alternating between terms like vacant, serene, and distant, none of which felt accurate. There was no sadness in her demeanor, no joy either, only a steady presence that seemed disconnected from the reactions she inspired. Whispers began to frame these subtleties in darker language. Some claimed Bella bent reality simply by existing within it, not intentionally, but as a consequence of her nature. Others suggested she represented a flaw in creation, a human-shaped error that disrupted the systems around her. Such ideas thrived precisely because they could not be tested. The lack of spectacle denied skeptics a clear target, while the accumulation of small anomalies denied believers any single truth to cling to. Fear grew not from what Bella did, but from what could not be explained away. Over time, people learned to modify their behavior around her without acknowledging why. Meetings were kept brief, rooms well lit, encounters limited to necessity. These precautions were never written as rules, but followed instinctively, passed through glances and pauses rather than words. Bella adapted without comment, as though accustomed to being navigated rather than understood. The subtle horror of her existence lay not in danger, but in disorientation, in the realization that something could unsettle reality without breaking it, could inspire fear without hostility, could remain utterly passive while everything else strained to accommodate its presence. Even after she left a place, the effects lingered. People reported dreams that felt unfinished, thoughts that slipped away before forming, a sense that something unresolved remained just beyond reach. Life resumed its ordinary patterns, yet an underlying doubt persisted, a question that no one voiced aloud. If something so extraordinary could pass through unnoticed by official history, altering nothing visibly while quietly unsettling everything beneath the surface, then certainty itself felt fragile, and the world suddenly seemed capable of harboring countless other anomalies, waiting patiently to be encountered, to be half-noticed, to be forgotten without ever truly disappearing, like Bella Adams herself, moving silently through the margins of recorded time, leaving behind only disturbances too small to be believed and too consistent to be ignored, as though reality had briefly revealed a seam and then closed it again, never fully aligning the edges, leaving those who sensed it forever uncertain whether what they experienced was a trick of perception or a glimpse into something that was never meant to be understood, something that did not announce itself with terror but whispered through subtle fractures in memory, time, and instinct, continuing quietly, unresolved, unchallenged, and still present in the unanswered spaces where explanation failed and silence chose to remain. As Bella Adams' story circulated through communities and institutions, the struggle to place her within any existing framework became increasingly strained. Science and superstition did not merely disagree about her, they collided and fractured under the weight of her presence. Physicians insisted that every human condition must have a biological root, yet Bella's case resisted diagnosis with quiet defiance. There were no deformities to measure, no fevers to chart, no cognitive deficits that could be reliably demonstrated. Each attempt to define her scientifically produced a new contradiction, as though observation itself altered the outcome. Charts conflicted, conclusions dissolved, and confidence weakened, leaving behind carefully worded notes that admitted nothing while explaining even less. The promise of reason faltered, not in failure, but in its inability to even frame the right questions. At the same time, superstition crept in where certainty withdrew. Ordinary people did not need proof in the academic sense. They trusted patterns of feeling and instinct. They spoke of Bella in hushed tones, associating her with omens that had long existed in folklore, children born under strange signs, individuals believed to walk slightly out of alignment with the natural order. Yet even superstition struggled to fully claim her. She did not fit the role of witch, nor spirit, nor cursed child. She caused no visible harm, offered no prophecies, and showed no awareness of possessing power. This absence of intention unsettled believers as much as skeptics, because it suggested a force that operated without purpose or morality, something indifferent to human meaning. Religious doctrine attempted to impose structure where both science and folklore failed. Clergy searched scripture for parallels, stories of figures who embodied mystery rather than malice, but Bella resisted symbolic interpretation. She did not inspire devotion in the traditional sense, nor did she provoke righteous fear. Her existence felt unfinished, as though she represented a question rather than an answer. Sermons delivered after encounters with her often circled themes of humility and uncertainty, subtly acknowledging the limits of spiritual authority without naming her directly. Faith, like science, found itself exposed, not disproven, but incomplete. This collision of belief systems created a cultural tension that extended far beyond Bella herself. If she could exist without explanation, then the boundaries separating rational thought from irrational fear began to blur. People who trusted science felt unsettled by its silence, while those rooted in superstition felt uneasy without clear signs to interpret. Bella became a living contradiction, forcing each observer to confront the fragility of their worldview. Conversations about her rarely reached conclusions, instead looping endlessly, each explanation undermined by another equally plausible doubt. In this way, she did not simply exist within history, she destabilized the frameworks used to understand it. What made this tension even more disturbing was the era in which it occurred. The late 19th century was defined by confidence in progress, by the belief that mysteries were temporary obstacles awaiting discovery. Bella's story contradicted this optimism. She suggested that some phenomena might persist not because they were complex, but because they did not conform to human systems of understanding at all. This idea was deeply unsettling, as it implied that knowledge had boundaries that could not be crossed through effort alone. For a society built on the promise of advancement, this was a quiet but profound threat. Attempts to reconcile these contradictions often resulted in avoidance rather than resolution. Institutions stopped asking certain questions, communities learned to look away, and Bella herself was moved gently but persistently out of focus. Silence became the compromise between competing beliefs, a way to preserve confidence without admitting defeat. Yet silence did not erase the unease. It merely buried it beneath routine and habit. The unanswered questions remained, pressing against the edges of awareness, resurfacing whenever certainty was challenged elsewhere. Bella Adams thus occupied a unique and unsettling position in history, not as proof of the supernatural, nor as a failure of science, but as evidence of something more troubling. She revealed how easily human understanding fractures when confronted with ambiguity that refuses resolution. Her existence forced observers to choose between discomfort and denial, between accepting uncertainty or clinging to incomplete explanations. Most chose the latter, not out of ignorance but out of necessity, because to dwell too long on Bella was to risk unraveling the fragile balance between belief and reason that allowed everyday life to continue. In the end, the collision between science, superstition, and faith did not produce clarity, only exhaustion. Each system retreated to safer ground, leaving Bella behind as an unresolved anomaly. She was neither condemned nor celebrated, neither studied to completion nor fully forgotten. Her story remained suspended in that uneasy space where explanations fail, where meaning slips just beyond reach, and where the most unsettling realization emerges quietly, that history is not a record of answers, but a collection of questions humanity chose, again and again, not to pursue further. As the years passed, Bella Adams did not meet a dramatic end, nor did her mystery resolve through discovery or confession. Instead, she faded in a manner far more unsettling, slipping gradually out of recorded existence. Mentions of her became shorter, less frequent, as though those responsible for documenting her life grew hesitant to commit her presence to paper. Official records that once noted her movements between caretakers and institutions ended abruptly, with no explanation for her absence. There was no death certificate conclusively linked to her name, no burial record that could be verified, no announcement of departure. It was as if she had stepped sideways out of history rather than forward into it, leaving behind only the faint impression that she had once been there. Those who claimed to have known her offered accounts that conflicted not just in detail but in fundamental outcome. Some believed she was quietly absorbed into a rural household, living out her days unnoticed, finally rendered ordinary by isolation. Others insisted she was sent to a distant institution under another name, deliberately erased to prevent further disturbance. A smaller number whispered that she simply walked away one evening and was never seen again, not lost to wilderness or crime, but dissolved into anonymity with unnatural ease. These stories shared no common ending, only a shared uncertainty that resisted closure. What remained consistent was the reluctance to search too deeply. Authorities who might have pursued answers showed little enthusiasm, as if the effort itself carried risk. Questions were redirected, files misplaced, responsibility passed quietly from one office to another until curiosity exhausted itself. This indifference did not feel accidental. It carried the weight of collective avoidance, a subtle agreement that whatever Bella represented was better left unexamined. Her disappearance did not provoke panic or mourning, but a muted relief, as though the removal of the mystery mattered more than the fate of the girl at its center. Yet disappearance did not erase impact. Long after Bella was gone, traces of her lingered in unexpected ways. People who encountered her years earlier described moments of sudden disorientation, memories resurfacing without context, a familiar unease triggered by unrelated events. Some claimed they still dreamed of her, not vividly, but as a presence just beyond sight, a figure standing at the edge of awareness. These experiences were rarely shared openly, dismissed as imagination or coincidence, but they persisted quietly, shaping personal narratives without ever entering public record. Local legends began to form, stripped of specifics and grounded instead in feeling. Stories circulated of a brown-eyed girl seen briefly at the margins of towns, never aging, never speaking, always leaving behind an atmosphere of stillness. These accounts were never attributed to Bella by name, yet they echoed the same unease that had once followed her. Whether these sightings were inventions or manifestations of unresolved memory mattered less than the fact that her absence did not feel complete. She had vanished physically, but conceptually she remained, embedded in the spaces where explanation had failed. Historians who later stumbled upon fragments of her story often struggled to determine where fact ended and embellishment began. The lack of a definitive conclusion complicated any attempt at analysis. Without an ending, Bella's narrative resisted categorization, refusing to conform to the structure of case study or cautionary tale. She could not be framed as victim or phenomenon because there was no resolution to anchor interpretation. This ambiguity rendered her both fascinating and frustrating, a subject easier to mention than to confront. The enduring power of Bella Adams' story lies precisely in this unfinished quality. In a world that seeks conclusions, her disappearance denies closure, forcing the listener to remain suspended in uncertainty. There is no moral lesson neatly tied to her fate, no revelation that reorders understanding. Instead, there is only the suggestion that some mysteries persist not because they are unsolved, but because they resist being solved at all. Her absence becomes part of the mystery, as meaningful as her presence once was. Over time, Bella transformed from a documented anomaly into a symbol of unresolved history, a reminder that not every life leaves behind a clear trajectory. She represents the quiet failures of record-keeping, the human tendency to look away from what cannot be managed, and the discomfort of acknowledging gaps in knowledge. Her story endures not through evidence, but through implication, through the lingering sense that something important slipped away unnoticed. In the silence left by her disappearance, imagination fills the void, constructing possibilities that reflect collective fears and curiosities. Bella becomes less a person and more a question, one that resurfaces whenever certainty is challenged. The lack of an ending ensures that her story remains alive, continually reshaped by those who encounter it. As long as history contains omissions and memory remains imperfect, figures like Bella Adams will continue to exist in the shadows between what is known and what is deliberately forgotten, unresolved, unrecorded, and still quietly unsettling those who sense that her story did not truly end, but simply moved beyond the limits of what could be written down.